Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, a show about writing and publishing with your host, J.F. Garrard.
Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven. I'm your host, J.F. Garrard, and today's episode is called What I Learned When Applying for My MFA and Writing My Own History. And we'll be speaking to Quyen Pham, the author of All of Us in the Belief anthology. Kathy is a Vietnamese-Canadian writer currently based in Saigon. She has published fiction in Rice Paper, Casby, and Node magazine. She is a graduate of the University of Calgary's Creative Writing and English program and a Killam Fulbright alumni. She can be found on Twitter as Phamanto, and we'll post the link later so you could follow her on Twitter. And she focuses on mental health and identity in the context of Vietnamese diaspora, but also enjoys writing across the spectrum of literary and speculative fiction. She was previously an editor and design lead for Node magazine and now works in technology. And her website is kathypham.ca. So welcome, Kathy, to the show.
Yeah, so happy to be here. Thank you for the introduction.
So can you tell us a bit about yourself and your experience and the different countries you're living in? You're mostly Vietnam and Canada, I guess?
Yeah, for the most part. So I was born and raised in Calgary, Alberta, which is like a pretty simple place to grow up, I think. A lot of snow, lots of cowboys, and lots of mountains and glaciers. So
I just
it
think
could
of
be
the
really
Stampede.
beautiful.
Is it the Stampede in Calgary? That's all I think of. I don't know.
Oh yeah, the
And
cowboys,
pancakes.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where I was born. I mean, in a way, it's kind of like every mid-sized town in North America, a little bit.
So when did your parents go there? I guess they immigrated from Vietnam to Calgary? Or?
Yeah, they did. So they arrived sometime in the late 90s. Oh, sorry, the early 90s, the late 80s. And then they had me a few years after. So I was born in Canada.
Oh, okay. Did they ever tell you why they? Because like you're back in Saigon now, so you started off in Vietnam, you came to Canada, and then now you're back. So are your parents
Yeah,
still in Canada, or?
they're in Canada. So both of them live in Canada now, as does my brother. So pretty much my immediate family is still in Canada, and they were very confused as to why I wanted to come back.
Oh, well, yeah, because they're thinking we worked so hard to immigrate there.
They really did too. Yeah, it was really tough. My father was one of the boat refugees, and so he came over first and then helped my mother immigrate with my brother about 10 years later. So they were separated for a really long time.
Oh, wow. Oh, now that I'm married, I'm like actually being separated from my husband for some time isn't too bad. No, I'm just kidding. But what's absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Truly.
So, why did you start writing, and why did you start writing in? Oh, I guess you were born in Canada, so you're writing in English naturally, like it's your mother tongue. So,
Yeah. Well, I guess I can say that I wrote a little bit, like all throughout my life. I mean, when I was a kid, it was more like fan fiction and like fantasy novels and stuff like that, right? So I only really took it seriously when I started university. As for Vietnamese, I mean, I never actually became literate in Vietnamese until like this year, and I'm 25, so it took a long time. Yeah, I think it was just never a priority for me to learn Vietnamese. It was a lot easier to just focus on English.
well, when you're in an environment when not many people speak it, like most people speaking, like my son's growing up in Toronto, and I'm trying to teach him Chinese, and he's like, nobody speaks Chinese. And I was like, that's only 1 billion people, but anyhow, but you want to have more opportunities, I guess, like teaching him more languages, and I'm sure like now that you're in Saigon, you appreciate the language a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always thought English was like very beautiful and poetic, and it's part of the reason why I love writing so much. But now that I am learning Vietnamese, I think it adds a very different dimension to not only my writing, but also the way I experience even my emotions. I mean, I have a different vocabulary in which to express myself now, which I think is very, very interesting.
So after you finished your bachelor in English and creative writing, I guess, what did you want to do after?
After I had a novel manuscript, which I had worked on with Aretha Van Herk at the University of Calgary. So it was about 70 pages, and I decided that, I'd wanted to live in Vietnam for a long time. My family used to go back to Vietnam every couple of years for vacation, and there was just something about Saigon that really struck me as just this beautiful and dynamic place. And so I always had that image in my head that I wanted to go back. And so after I graduated, I did. And I had this novel and I wanted to finish it. And then I also ended up getting a job here. So I stayed for a few years.
Oh, wow. Okay. And then now you're thinking about an MFA.
Yes. So
So
I worked
why,
for,
I guess why? Why do you want to do an MFA?
oh my God, such a good question. Because honestly, like in a sense, the MFA isn't truly necessary to be a writer. But for me, it was like I had this feeling that I really wanted to commit to writing the way that I commit to my day job, like 6 or 7 or 8 hours of like just focus on that particular thing every single day in an institution and an environment that will nourish that kind of labor. And I felt that it was really difficult for me to write when I was just fitting writing into the margins of my life.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I
So,
thought an MFA was the way to go. Yeah.
okay. So when you were at University of Calgary, so what was that program like? I mean, I think a lot of people listening probably haven't been through maybe just the bachelor's. Like I was not allowed to go that route. So
Mhm.
my parents were pretty strict. So I'm just curious, like how was the bachelor and how do you expect the master's to be different from the bachelor's in creative writing?
Ah, well, it was interesting because my time at the University of Calgary, I came in as an English lit major. And so a concentration in creative writing mostly means that you take a few creative writing courses. But by and large, most of your academic work is going to be in theory and in academic writing. So that means that while I was doing creative writing, I was also balancing a lot of different coursework, doing theory, studying survey courses, and doing a lot of electives in order to, just to meet the requirements and graduate.
Hmm.
So during that time, I was really lucky to have really great creative writing instructors, though. So I met Larissa Lai there, who worked on me with my honors thesis. And eventually I just had this kind of epiphany that like being Vietnamese Canadian matters here in this context. And I really wanted to know where our stories were. During that time, I was lucky to be exposed to other books like Dion Brand's What We All Long For and Camilla Gibbs' Beauty of Humanity movement, and then Kim Thuy's Rue. So these are all Canadian stories that have Vietnamese Canadians in them. So that was really pivotal for me going through the English Lit program. And so now that I'm doing the MFA, I'm like, okay, this is dedicated time. It's just all creative writing all the time. There's no more splitting between other types of coursework. I mean, I can if I want, but it's dedicated to creative writing instead of being a combined degree.
And Node magazine, that was a University of Calgary magazine that you worked on? Or...
Yeah. I was really lucky to work with Node for 2 years on the editorial team. And it was really, really nice to just work with other students who had a real passion for the literary community and to want to contribute to that. Like we read so much work from writers all over the world. And it was like such a privilege to be able to publish work from these people and just try to get it out into the world. Because being a writer can be so lonely. Without the community of literary magazines, I think.
Now, in your bio, you talk about being a Killam Fulbright alumni. What was that? Was that a program?
Yeah, it's this like kind of little known exchange program between Canadian universities and American ones, and it's funded by the Fulbright program, which is the American post-secondary like a huge post-secondary scholarship source. So they send Canadian students to the United States and American students to Canada to study for a semester or for 2. And I was really lucky to get that scholarship, and I studied at Ithaca for 4 months, which is in upstate New York.
Oh, so you lived there too, and you wrote. And, okay, that sounds really neat. And
Yeah, it was a great experience.
quite a honor that you got this award too. So
Yeah.
So what was the process of applying for the MFA, and what was the most challenging aspect of the application process?
Oh my God. Applying was so hard. And I think oh gosh. I think I started applying in June, like quote unquote applying, because that was when I started looking at programs. And so most of the applications are due in December. And so that means it was like 5 or 6 months of preparation. And for part of that, it was literally just 3 months of me working full time and every single day going home and working on my application. I think I went through 5 or 6 major rewrites of my personal statement, and then like tens of like many tens of edits in each draft as well. So it's just a ton of labor. And I was really lucky that I actually had stories that I was able to send out with my application, because if I hadn't, writing additional stories would have probably tipped me over to like, it's over. 5 months is not enough time. I should just reapply next year.
So like what kind of word count were they looking for? Like you have your personal essay and then they wanted samples, I guess like a portfolio, right?
Yeah, so they wanted a portfolio. So every single program has slightly different requirements, which makes applying for 10 programs like I did actually extremely time consuming, just paperwork wise. So some programs will say they want around 20 pages, which is on the low end, and some will take up to 80, which is a lot.
Oh my
And then
God,
as
80.
an applicant, you have no idea how many pages they're actually looking for. You're like, I joined a few like groups of other people who were applying, and there are always questions like, if their page limit is 25, can I submit 26? Like, what are the rules here? It's so confusing.
Make your font smaller? No, they probably have font requirements and spacing requirements. So,
They do. Oh my goodness. 12-point font, double space, no exceptions. Times New
oh my.
Roman.
So did you get into are you happy with your selection? Like at the end you were accepted for a bunch of them, I presume, and then you had to make a decision?
I was really lucky to be accepted into multiple programs, so I did have a choice. But right from the outset, I think I was careful about the schools I was applying to, and I knew that no matter which school accepted me, that it was probably going to be a good fit. So I can say ultimately, even after many rejections, that I'm still very happy with where I got in and where I chose to accept.
So where are you going?
I'm going to UC Riverside in California. I just accepted their offer last week, I think.
Oh my gosh. And so I guess, do they offer help with housing, or are you gonna fly over there and look for a place?
They do offer a little bit of help with housing, and they technically have on-campus residence. But I'm also really lucky in that one of my old friends from Ithaca is looking to move with me to California so that we can share cost of accommodations.
Oh, that's perfect. Oh, I love California and their palm trees. And like it's
I've
such
actually
nice
never,
weather. Really?
yeah,
Well,
I have no idea.
yeah, I have some relatives there, so we go there once in a while. I haven't been there in quite a few years, but like I have good memories of California. It's a nice place. And then you're
Aw.
close enough, you can drive to either, San Francisco or wherever, do little road trips on the side. I mean, it's quite a big, I mean, when you think about it, the States is a big country. So, once you're there, you can travel all sorts of places. Well, once COVID is over. Okay, we're still in COVID. Okay, after COVID is over, so
Hopefully soon. Oh my goodness, it's just been a rough year.
yeah, it is. It's pretty crazy. Now, you write about mental health and you write in the speculative fiction genre as well. So why do you choose to focus on these things?
Well, I do really love literary realism as well, and I do write a lot in that mode. But that said, I think spec fic is super powerful because it helps us project ourselves into the future.
Mhm.
And when you're writing speculative fiction, I feel like you're not so bound by the rules of, national literatures or cultural identities now. You can sort of imagine what life will be like if they change a little bit. Like what happens if just the world is not the world is as it is. And
Mhm.
it makes room for these like grand metaphors for identity, I think. And that's why I'm really drawn to speculative fiction.
Yeah, I'm sort of the same. Like I write a lot of spec because in a way, I think when something terrible happens, like having it in our present world, it makes it more awful. I don't know how to explain it. Like it's too realistic sometimes, like looking at
Mm,
literary fiction, right? So having a spec fiction world almost has a barrier and you sort of think about it a bit more, and it doesn't hurt as much, I think.
Yeah.
Um, so do you have any advice for people who find it difficult to finish stories? Like, I think a lot of people want to write, but a lot of them have difficulty starting and finishing.
This is something I struggle with too, but I think at the end of the day, we have to write something that we really truly care about. Like when I look back at the stories that I haven't finished or that I haven't refined, and even the novels that I haven't finished or haven't refined, um, ultimately those were things that I didn't care about anymore, not enough to continue writing them. And it's just something that I like really felt in my bones that this wasn't it. So ultimately, when you do write, you must feel in your bones that this thing must be said. So at the same time, though, I think writers shouldn't be afraid of stopping. Sometimes stopping and like really trying to piece together your life and your identity is also a part of the writing, and you return to the writing.
Yeah, I was horrifying some of my writer friends when I told them I threw out some manuscripts because I was like, it's not working anymore. And they're like, what? But you spent so long. And I was like, well, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think you're practicing and practicing, So it's not like it was totally gone to waste, right?
Well, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so like when you write a story, do you do an outline at all? Do you plot at all? Or do you just go into it with an idea?
For me, with my short stories, I definitely don't plot, and I don't think I will start plotting. For me, usually the short story kind of just evolves as I write it. But I haven't finished a novel yet, and I know that plotting can be super useful for writing novels. So that would be something I would be willing to try. I mean, broadly speaking, I think writing, well, not writing, but the working process that you sort of develop around writing is just a huge trial and error thing. And I'm still experimenting with like the way to approach things. And I think it will change with every project too, right?
Yeah, I noticed some people telling me they use like fiction outlines, like, they sort of have little things about, okay, at this chapter, this is supposed to happen, that chapter, and I'm sort of looking at it, but at the same time, it's still hard, even if they tell you what's supposed to happen, because, it's still your story, right? You're not just gonna blindly follow an outline, and, although I know some genres do sort of have a formula, like romance, right? I've often heard, they sort of follow a formula, which makes it a
Mhm.
little bit easier, but still a lot of work, even just for plotting and stuff. So what's the latest project you're working on right now? I guess you're getting ready for school, right?
Oh man, no, for me, the application season was just like, that was it.
Yeah,
That was heavy lifting. I stopped writing for a few months after that.
yeah.
Um, but right now, I am actually working on another novel, which is spec fic. It's going to be set in near future Vietnam. And it's about two young Asian women who just experience this deep yearning for each other. And right now, I think that's the core of the novel.
Well, I hope you finish it. There's been a lot of like boy love novels, but I don't think I've seen too many very popular like girl love novels. So,
Yeah,
hopefully.
exactly. I think it's really important to explore like queer Asian desire and like the way that mental health sort of presents itself in our community and in our personal relationships. So I'm really hoping that this is, kind of the novel that's the one.
Yeah, you never know, right? How far it'll go sometimes. So, well, hopefully. Now, where can we find you? I guess you have a website and you're on Twitter. So, if people are curious about you, they can find you there. And can you tell us a little bit about your going to read before you start?
Yeah, so I'm going to be reading a story called All of Us, which appears in the in the Belief book. It was published in Rice Paper back in 2018, and I was so happy when I heard that Rice Paper was going to take it. And it's about this really awkward wedding where family tensions just sort of explode. So there's a ton of like layers of intergenerational trauma here between the sister and the brother and their mother and their father, and how every member of the family is kind of estranged from each other.
Now, I always want to ask you, was that based on a true story or was it something you thought of?
Oh, I've been asked this question specifically about this story a lot because it's like it's almost too real, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I would say that the events of the story are made up, but the feelings of the story are real. And so I think I drew a lot from personal experience when I wrote this story. And it was one of the first short stories I really polished and really believed in.
Mhm.
And I think that kind of shows in how it came out and how it was received. Mm.
Okay, well, I look forward to hearing you read.
Okay, thank you very much. So, I heard wearing black to weddings was inauspicious, so that must have been why I was vomiting into the hotel's hydrangea bush while my brother kissed a loan shark's daughter 5 stories above. My father slapped my back as I coughed up my canapes. We hadn't seen each other in 3 years, but that didn't stop me from asking him for a cigarette to light the bile out of my mouth. I stood with my back to him, searching for the harbor. Outside Shangri-La, you couldn't see the ocean. Too many office towers stood between us and the waves, but a sea musk lingered. Salt, tar, shrimp, bile. The surface of my eyes burned with it. I took drags that filled my lungs and charred my throat. I put out the filter with my bare foot. My mother's heels clattered in my hands. My father followed me back to the hotel with the gait of a hungry ghost. We shared an elevator with a blonde man in a tan suit. He looked at us once and then not again. To him, we were just a girl woman in a wine-stained dress and a bald Asian man with a scar veining across his head. When the doors opened on the 5th floor, the sounds of the wedding flooded in. Vietnamese shouts floated into Mandarin. Fish sauce dumped into shark fin soup. I slid the shoes back on. My father offered me his arm. I looked away. He hovered a half step behind. His voice reached out to me. Where did you pick up those habits? I replied, when did you pick up your girlfriend? He sighed, Wen, I want to help you. He grabbed my arm with one hand while fumbling for his wallet with the other. He licked his finger before using it to count out bills. 1, 2, 3, 400. Under the chandeliers, those crumpled dollars shone gold. I tore away from him. I spat out, you haven't even given me Lisi in 12 years. My Vietnamese, worn from disuse, gets caught in my throat. My father flinched. His money rustled when he shoved it into my face. Either his knuckles or the bills smelled of nicotine and Budweiser. I let both hang in the air. I heard, he blinked, all filmy irises. You've been behind on your loans. Yeah, you'd be familiar, I said. Save it for your wife. Visas aren't cheap. I turned and stopped. My brother glided through the crowd and toward us. His suit jacket strained tight against his shoulders. He ignored the people who swiveled in his wake. Their comments, both the calls and the whispers, foundered against him. He towered over most people, me and my father included. Dad, sis, he said. Tung? I watched my father grasp at his son with words. You'll always be my boy, you know. I know, Tom said. And then to me, he said, Quinn, let's talk. Tom pulled me by the arm, smile never dropping from his face. His dimples sunk deep on both cheeks. When we were kids, the aunties at the supermarket would look at him and say those were dollar cheeks, a sign of prosperity. Ceremony followed us out. Wedding guests approached in 2 queues. On the left, our Vietnamese south-hailing distant relatives. To the right, Charisse's Beijing-born family. There's a difference, Tom told me once. Not much, I thought. Same wine, new vintage, provincial blends notwithstanding. He shook hands and dimpled his thanks without breaking stride. When the procession ended, we were in exile by the elevator. My brother let go of the breath he'd been holding, perhaps since he'd said his vows. With it, his body folded inward. What were you doing with Dad? He asked. I showed him a pearly smile. We were just making up. He furrowed his fresh-groomed eyebrows. Can you avoid him, please? I said I didn't even know he was here. It's not my fault. He was outside smoking while I was getting some air. Tom said I had to promise Charisse he wouldn't make trouble. I replied, what about Mom? Tom stared at me, and I laughed and laughed until my voice echoed through the vestibule. He waited until I stopped to catch my breath and put his hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, the kind you'd use to scruff a misbehaving puppy. He told me this is an important day for all of us, not just me. And I said, you were the chosen kid, but never the smart one. Back at our table, Mom's knockoff Gucci bag hung from the back of her chair. A half-eaten lobster dominated the table, its shell drowned in congealing butter sauce. As I sat down, a waiter arrived to take it away. I, my mother, her favorite sister, her younger brother, and his wife were all seated together. My mum hissed at me. "Where were you? You missed the most expensive dishes." And the others pretended not to hear. She spoke in Vietnamese, but I answered in English, riposte and retreat. "It's not like we're paying for it. You have wine on your dress. Blame that on the girl who spilled it on me." I swigged the half-drunk room-temperature Heineken I'd left behind. My mother narrowed her eyes at me. "This is an unlucky day," she said. Under the chandelier lights, her purple eyeshadow sparkled. "Don't you care about your brother's happiness?" I said, "Tom landed new money. What does luck matter now? And if most of it was clean, who were we to care if a bit of it wasn't?" My mother's cheeks reddened. "You think you know about luck, child?" And I laugh. "You're just pissed they went with the Chinese fortune teller's advice instead of yours." My mother looked as though she'd like to spit in my drink before my uncle interrupted. "Be happy, sister. This is a wonderful day." Her sharp gaze fell on him. "Because of me," she said. He recoiled. "I ate misfortune for them so they could have easy lives. Do you see how they treat me?" But my mother didn't believe in any of that fate shit until grandmother died. It was easier to owe the gods than the sharks. I wanted to shout, "Don't blame anyone but yourself." But instead I gripped the neck of that green bottle as the rim hit my lips and I drank. Glass braced against teeth. My aunt hushed the table. "We're here to celebrate, not dwell on the past." The red rising up my mother's cheeks faded and she quieted. Uncle slid me another bottle. A waiter glided by and deposited plates of filet mignon in front of us. The steak bled as I forced chunks down my throat, tugged down my esophagus with swigs of beer that tasted more like water these days. My aunt told me to slow down. I chewed until the meat leavened to dough in my mouth. I rested on my elbows in the washroom. Beside me, a half-empty green glass bottle. A flush crept up my chest, splattered my collarbones, and burned from my chin to my temple. My veins had opened and pushed my pulse to the surface. Pressing my tongue to the roof of my mouth, I tasted tobacco stains, steeped like the wine on my dress. A toilet flushed. The Chinese girl who dumped her drink on me earlier emerged from the stall. She kept her head down, as if she just wanted to wash her manicured hands and go. My voice echoed in the marble-tiled chamber. "What, no honor left?" I said. "You ran into me," her glare cut sideways. "Drunk Bai Chi." I drew myself up. "You think you're better than me." She laughed. "We know your dad. He came begging us for money years ago. How do you think your brother met Charisse? Fuck knows what I slapped her. She raised her arm and I saw that her manicure came to sharp points. I stepped back and her cat's paw carried her stumbling forward. I said, "You sold out your own for a fake nose." I grabbed the bottle and hovered between her and the door. She shoved me. I dumped Heineken on her. She pushed until I slammed against the wall. She screamed. I screamed. We tangled into each other, grabbing and pulling until someone else came in and carried her away. I saw her clearly then, ink splatter hair and smeared lipstick, both of us in black with matching stains swirling down our dresses. Hers might have been velvet, but that just meant beer clung to it better. Heels tripped me up. I propped my back up along the windows away from the dining tables, lost in the haze of the skyline. The room chimed silverware against wine glasses. Chants of kiss, home, when, do it, Tom, claim the bride. Tom placed his hand on Sharice's cheek. A mounting chorus of his 200 closest friends, family members, and inextricable others accompanied my brother's display of completion. He drew all 5 feet and 100 pounds of his new wife into his arms and planted a kiss on her, pretty in white. Even my mother clapped, pride crawling up her throat and emerging as a broad, half-dentured smile. I stumbled over to Mother and said, "Hey." My uncle stood to grab me. "Child, are you okay?" One of the aunts tittered, "Come sit down." Uncle again, "Sister, help her clean up." Me, as I crush against my uncle's side. Guess nobody's told her yet. My mother, finally. Told what? Mirth brewed in the depths of my body. Tommy invited Dad. I let the laughter trickle out. Isn't that funny? Pity in Uncle's eyes. Yee. Mother's demand. Get tung? I sat side saddle in the chair, splaying my legs over the side, while the rest of me twisted toward my mother and brother. Wisely, the aunties and uncles fled. Why would you do this? Red smeared Mum's cheeks. You've worked too hard to let him destroy us again. Tom held his head in his hands, gelled hair spiking through his fingers. He called me. I couldn't just ignore him. Golden brew sloshed back and forth in the bottle I took off a table somewhere in the distance from there to here. He is a lying, cheating drunk, my mother said. He abandoned us. I know what he did, my brother interrupted. I said he didn't do it all by himself. You! Tom's fist hit the table and the plates rattled. Shut up. I know you don't give a shit about family, but I do. I drank. Blood is arbitrary. Tom looked at me for a long beat. I stared back, but his edges wavered in my underwater vision. When's the last time you said anything with substance? My palms itched. Forget her, Thung. What are you going to do about your father? My mother asked. I can't just kick him out, he said. I looked away. The people seated by us leaned over their dessert course to whisper about why the groom might be fighting with his mother and sister while his beautiful new wife waited on the die. Are you going to wait until he ruins your wedding? About the sister. Wasn't she at some kind of art school? What a waste. She got into a fight with the bride's spoiled cousin earlier. That one is still mad she wasn't in the wedding party. He promised he wouldn't drink. Nobody can even see him. The mother demanded the wedding be pushed back. She probably hates the in-laws. They definitely hate her reputation at the casino. But honestly, they're all quite familiar. How could you forgive him after what he did? That father, wasn't he involved with the gangs? Explains the scars. I heard he owed some rough people a lot of money. You think it had to do with the wife? I don't know how they managed to get out. My mother's voice broke, ringing in my ears. Strange men making demands at our door, my brother hitting the floor. There are wounds on the bodies of the men in my family that I still pick at, trying to find the flesh beneath. If I find it in them, maybe I'll finally be able to see it in myself too. Tom looked at me. He said, I had to. My mother covered her eyes when she began to cry. How could she understand that? These are not the fortunes they print in numerology books or the ones they call out in Baccarat. I stood. Tom asked me, haven't you done enough? Enough. Green bottles weren't enough to drown in. Anger had not been enough to burn in. Art, not enough to submerge. The rest I remember only in strands, tangled and out of order. My history, a VHS torn to ribbons. I wandered around the ballroom. The verb they use in the report is searching. My pulsing weight bobbed through the crowd, a fat, bald face burning as he stood to yell at someone. the red-soled heel of the sharp woman hooking her arm through a young man's, several empty bottles of Hennessy, and a senior in a blooming silk shirt. I bumped into a waiter with a slicked-back pompadour. At one point I fell, spun gold filigree on cream-vaulted ceilings. I'm told my mother and brother were sitting together when it happened. I imagine him watching her, unsure what he could say to make her stop crying and speaking anyway. I don't think she ever stopped, even after she got what she wanted. I don't remember how I found him, but they say I did. He was seated far from the wedding dye, partially hidden from view by a voluminous centerpiece. Allegedly, I smiled at him, that green bottle resting in my palm. I said, "Hi, Dad." He smiled at me. Then he got up from his chair and started to introduce me to the other exiles, hangers-on. One of his arms came around my shoulder, another gripping that Budweiser he always favored, the kind he'd ask me to fetch for him from the fridge, the one that stank of piss on his breath. I remember kissing my dad on the cheek while he was sleeping once. I remember the stubble, the nicotine, and his unmarked face. Those evenings he made dinner and we watched TV, I remember loving my father. For all that remembering, I can't forget long nights in an empty house, strange people in our living room, my mother telling me to never, ever open the front door, and still coming home to bottles and broken glass under our feet and screaming that never ceased. Him and her, they wagered us at those tables. What a surprise we didn't come back whole from the barter. I hit him with the bottle, and those carved veins opened again. I want to believe there would have been a shatter like a bang, loud enough to cut the ballroom in twine, but there wasn't, just the whimper of glass shards dancing over skin. I opened my mouth, and nothing of substance came out. Peering at my cut palms, I hoped that they too would scar. Sorry, I think I might have gone over time, but I suppose we can edit that out.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, it was a wonderful story. I mean, wonderful story about terrible things, but I really enjoyed reading your story. I've read it many times, and I believe one time we even published in Dark Helix. So it's been published, a couple of times. And but our time is up. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was such a lovely joy to finally meet you, JF.
Yeah, I know, to meet each other virtually. And I just want to remind people we're doing a giveaway raffle for the book launch of Believe, so that you can get a copy of the ebook and you can read Kathy's story, all of us, as well as a $5 US Amazon gift card. So we'll be posting links later, and hopefully you'll enter. For more upcoming episodes of the Artsy Raven about writing and publishing, visit us at jfgarage.com/arpodcast. A reminder to Patreon subscribers that there's bonus content available for every episode on the Patreon website. If you enjoyed the show, you can show your appreciation by buying us some digital coffee. The Artsy Raven is produced by J.F. Garrard. The voice in the show's introduction is Chris Gorman, and music is by Tim Moore. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe.